Whoops. Here we go. Hey, how's it going? My name is Ryan, your unexceptional craftsman for this build, and today I'm going to be making a miniature medieval shop sign for my workspace. Now, if I'm completely honest with myself, I'm basically making a glorified shelf bracket, but at least it can serve a dual purpose, so I guess that's neat. Anyway, the idea came to me after playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and me wanting to do a project that incorporated our logo. We are unexceptional craftsmen, and medieval guilds often use these signs, so it seemed like a perfect fit. If you're wondering why I still have the template on while cutting everything out, that's a good question, and one we won't get an answer to because I don't remember. Seems like a good way to ruin a perfectly good template, so don't be like me. Now it's off to the trusty router table using a flush trim bit to get to the final dimensions of the bracket. More exceptional craftsmen could have skipped this step altogether and achieved the desired results by just using the bandsaw and the scroll saw. I, however, lack the steadiness required to get straight lines and clean curves, so I'm okay with still needing to use training wheels to get me to that final result. I did, however, end up going back to the scroll saw again to finish the corners where the router bit couldn't reach. I was originally going to make this great piece by hand, but my senses got the better of me knowing that I was going to be spending a decent amount of time manually cutting out other things, so I opted for the laser instead. The downside to the laser is that the thickness of the material that I can cut is limited, hence the 2 pieces. While I would have sanded anyway, the laser leaves burn marks and other minor imperfections that require a little more attention and elbow grease, especially on the backside of the piece. As always, I'm using a variety of grits to clean up the issues and get that nice smooth finish. Getting this to fit properly was actually way more difficult than I'm showing here because I did a terrible job at freehanding those corners. Thankfully though, I was finally able to get it done. Here I'm marking the positions for the screw eyes. You can place them wherever looks best for your particular sign, but starting in the center of the lowest point on this little hump is what looked most visually appealing to me. Once those positions have been marked, the eyes can easily be screwed in by hand and can even be bent into the needed angle if you're lazy and didn't get it right the first time. Now time to cut out the logo with a cheap jeweler saw that I purchased off Amazon. The saw comes with an assortment of blades, so it takes a little testing to find the best blade for the metal being used, in this case brass, but once you do, the work is pretty straightforward. Once again, my inability to freehand well ends up making more work for me later on, but practice is an important step on the journey to becoming an exceptional craftsman, especially for those who aren't natural-born masters of their craft. With that said, I took the easy way out and did the engraving with a Cricut. Practice of my engraving skills will have to wait another day. Unfortunately, the downside of a Cricut is not really being able to control the depth of the engraving. It was quite shallow and I didn't see much improvement with multiple passes, so the details were only visible in certain lighting conditions, like here. Here I'm tracing out an R, for my name of course, because I wanted to go for that medieval illuminated manuscript kind of feel and add a little extra visual appeal to the grate. I cut out quite a bit of footage for this part because I ended up altering the design due to an unforeseen issue with not being able to fit my files between the outer ring and the letter. So I decided to hack the ring off, which I think ended up looking better in the end. I just wish I had recognized the issue sooner. With the outer ring gone, I had free rein to clean up all the edges with some files. I typically use a flat file for most of the cleanup, but I like a rounded file better for the curves. Well, except here apparently. You'll start to notice a pattern here, but I originally cut one of these wooden logo cores out with the bandsaw before deciding to switch to the laser to save some time and effort. There's a metal backing to this wooden core as well that was left over from my tabletop fire pit video, but I left that side unengraved, which essentially makes this a one-way sign. Now to add some screw eyes to the sign itself, which our logo lends very well to by offering up our domes as the perfect mounting points. And with that done, it's time to cut some of this little chain to length in preparation of hanging the sign. It ended up being that one length was only slightly longer than the other since the curve of the bracket offsets the height of our heads. But before I connect the chains, it's time to jump over to the table saw to cut the wood for the top of the bracket. I already had some cedar offcuts that were close to the size I needed, so it's just a quick trim with the saw to get the final dimensions. For those with a keen eye, it might look like I'm cutting out 2 different pieces, and that's because I am. Keep watching until the end to find out why. Or skip ahead. That's probably what you're going to do anyways. Here I've got 2-inch brad nails that I'll be using to secure the top piece to the bracket. Glue is also an option, but the brad nails seem to be holding up fine enough so far. I stained the bracket off camera using Minwax Early American, but now that doesn't quite seem fitting given this build is inspired by medieval Europe. At least the color is nice. Now, back to the router table to add some keyhole slots to the bracket using a keyhole router bit. There are other ways to achieve a flush mount, like fastening screws through the bracket into the wall, but the router bits were cheap on Amazon, and I prefer not having visible screws in the final piece. The little block of wood that I have between the fence and the bracket is there to keep the cut centered, since attaching the top piece to the bracket created an overhang that left the remainder of the bracket unsupported against the fence. Basically, I created a problem for myself by prematurely attaching the top piece to the bracket, which I then had to figure out how to work around. The holes aren't perfect, but at least I didn't cut one upside down. Well, not on this bracket anyway. I was going to leave this top piece as is, but I wasn't able to hide the brad nail holes as well as I wanted to. The glue and sawdust trick wasn't quite working like I had hoped, and left a pretty noticeable color variation between the natural wood and the filler, so I opted to cover it all up with some face pieces instead. I already had some really thin boards on hand, so I just cut them to the appropriate dimensions using the table saw and the bandsaw. I chose not to do 45-degree miters for time and safety reasons, since I still need my fingers, so I have the top overlapping the front and side face pieces. Although I didn't show it here, I did use quite a few clamps to hold everything together during the glue up. This little flush trim saw is quite handy and doesn't mar up the reference surface, which is great. I'm pretty sure I bought it after watching a bourbon moth woodworking video, and I'd have to recommend it as well. Link is in the description. Now, just a quick file to clean it all up and it's good to go to glue on the final piece. The downside of not doing miters is that you don't get that seamless transition from one face to the other. But I still prefer this to the end grain of the underlying core, especially after sanding and applying stain. Once again, I'm back to filing to clean up all the jagged edges left over from sawing and to get everything flush. Or at least close enough to flush. There were some nooks and crannies that I couldn't fully get into with the files, but I was at least able to smooth out the jagged edges. Some of the wood was removed in the process as well, and since the edges were burned with the laser, it exposed the wood's natural color. To fix that, I completely sanded down the edges and applied some stain. Given how much I've been working with metal recently, I should probably invest in some sort of polishing kit to help me obtain that nice reflective surface. I typically use a variety of grits of sandpaper and occasionally some metal polish, but I think my biggest issue is my straight up ignorance of the topic. I really just need to sit down and educate myself on the correct process for achieving that shiny, scratch-free look. That, or throw some money at a kit and see if that works. For this build though, I'm happy enough with the final outcome. Alright, now it's time to glue on the letter to hopefully bring out that illuminated manuscript feel. If nothing else, it adds a little personalization to the sign while also representing the Unexceptional craftsman as a dynamic duo, just like how we do our videos. As you may recall, the depth of the engraving is quite shallow and doesn't show up well under the light in my workspace. So my solution to that problem is filling in the details with the oldest black acrylic paint that I could find. Now, old paint isn't a requirement, I just like to make things more difficult for myself. Though it ended up working fine enough once I figured out the right amount of water to mix into it to keep the paint in the engraved areas while allowing for the rest to be easily brushed off the surface. Perhaps it would have been easier to apply fresh new paint, but regardless, the details are significantly more visible now with the paint added, even if it doesn't always appear so on camera. No matter how hard I tried, I could not get video of connecting the chain, so just imagine what that looks like using pliers in each hand. Anyway, thanks for watching, make sure you go check out Adam's logo inspired video, and enjoy the reveal.
The tankard high, my friend, where tales and laughter never end. The fire roars, the ale does flow in this fine hall where spirits glow. Oh, sing a tune and clap your hand, we're the merriest lots in all the land. Through mead and wine our voices blend in the tavern's heart where nights transcend.